everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. This is your extra show for the week. My name is Cammy Bell. I'm your host, as always. A little bit of a different flavour to this week's show. I'm sure most of you will still be feeling a sense of disappointment, not just with the 1-1 draw with Braga at Ibrox on Thursday night in our Europa League run, which has been pretty dismal, to say the least, but just what you were watching in terms of the overall performance. And I'll be honest, a missed opportunity for Rangers to be able to get all 3 points with a goal advantage and a man advantage. We seem to conspire to our own downfall like no other team I've seen in recent memory. And I wanted to be able to ask our CEO subscribers on our Patreon site their thoughts on what has to happen across the January window, which will be here with us in only a few short weeks. It's been a bit of a mixed bag, let's be honest, under Danny Rule, and there is definitely a lot which has been outside of his control, the vast percentage, I think. He has inherited a squad that has real lack of quality across the board, and he is doing what he can, and I think that has to be applauded. The issue right now, as things stand, and obviously you'll have, if the proviso you haven't been living on the moon, you'll have seen that Rangers exited Patrick Stewart and Kevin Thelwell from their positions at the beginning of this week, with many people saying that's been long overdue. And I'll be honest with you, I would agree with that opinion. The way how both have come in and failed to hit the respective metrics, Patrick Stewart, I don't think, has done anything worthy of note in his tenure as CEO, which is probably pretty disappointing for me, because I thought, seeing the guy coming in and with the pedigree that he had, obviously a very long time within roles at Man United, and Kevin Thelwell, in terms of the recruitment, you would hope that with some of the exposure that he would have had to markets down south, that you initially thought, well, this could be pretty positive, and it absolutely turned out to be the case in both sets of circumstances. And it's ultimately, right now, as things stand, we're paying the cost for that. The immediate one, as everyone can see just now, is how horrendous our recruitment window has been across the summer. We are a team that, as far as I'm concerned, has gone backwards. We have lost players and failed to replace them with better quality. And in actual fact, probably now we can all agree, with some downgrades. Regular listeners to Extra and also our shows on our Patreon site, if you've heard me before, I was almost willing to cut the players a little bit of slack under the previous head coach, Russell Martin, because I felt that the way how he wanted to play football stymied quite a lot of the players. We needed to be able to see more from them under a different regime that would have allowed them to play with a little bit more expression. We are not seeing that. Domestic form has improved, right? Let's not say that everything's terrible and throw the baby out with the bathwater. Of course, we've won 4 games in the bounce. And if you're listening to this late on Sunday afternoon, I hope we've made that 5 against Falkirk at Ibrox on Sunday with our 2 o'clock kickoff. But by and large, I think the evidence that we need to see is now fairly compelling. And it's a huge disappointment to all of us. I was at Ibrox on Thursday night. There was a plethora of empty seats around me. I couldn't give tickets away for people to go and attend. And there's a direct correlation between that and the way how the team is performing, the way how you're seeing levels of football being played in front of you. We are in a position where everyone, I think, listening to this of a Rangers persuasion, would absolutely take results over performances. Of course we would, because it's been such a dire start to the season, both in the European and domestic fronts. We've been able to shape some of that into a better position now, thanks to Danny Rule coming in. However, and within Europe, I just feel now that we've lost a lot of fans who used to really enjoy going to Ibrox on a Thursday night. We have played much better teams in previous years than we've faced across this Europa League run. And we have been able to almost, our only consistent marker has been for us to be able to make opposition teams look better than they actually are. Thursday night was a low quality game of football. I did not think that Braga were great shakes. There's definitely some talent within their team, and I would never be dismissive of them like that because they are a European mainstay. But at the same point, other Rangers teams in the past would be blowing them away with 3 or 4 goal victories. This Rangers team struggles to make chances, still struggles to create anything of note going forward. As soon as we get the ball within the middle third, it just feels like we really, really cannot find any kind of form of penetrative pass that's going to unlock a defence, being able to try and break it open. We have very little up front to finish those chances if we were able to create them. And I think the kind of key area is also what's happening with the defence. There's a little bit of a pinch of salt with what happened on Thursday night with the defence because we've had 2 key injuries to centre halves with John Suter and Derek Cornelius. So Giga and Fernandez have had to come in. Fernandez obviously hasn't played a lot of football and is really getting his chance now because of those injuries. Giga, for me, even prior to his absolute calamity, which led to the Braga equaliser last night, I just don't think he's ever looked tremendously comfortable. And it's a real concern. I don't think Max Aarons, and again I caveat this by being completely fair to him about having to play again out of position and having to play in at left back because we have one left back, and it appeared that Magoma had returned from international break with a slight note. He didn't start on Thursday night. I wonder if the manager now potentially regrets that decision and wouldn't have benched them. He probably would have started them, seen if we could have been able to get out a fairly decent or comfortable lead and then take Magoma off. These are all ifs and buts and maybes, of course. And I wanted to ask our chief exec subscribers on our Patreon site what they wanted to see in terms of improvements in the next few weeks as we build into January. And as the picture stands right now, so forgetting everything that could happen domestically, because we do have a spate of fixtures across the festive period as always, what would you look to be able to try and strengthen? Where do you think your priority areas are? Where do you think, from a European perspective, this has left us? And also, would you have any considerations for anyone for the sporting director and CEO positions? I'll go through what they've said. I'll add in my own kind of thoughts. Really keen to get your thoughts as well in the comments. And again, like I say, just it's an interesting picture in terms of where we are now. And I don't want this to be doom and gloom. Right, I'm going to be honest with you. I think I always try and be fair and give a honest representation of where we are, but we can't do that with overwhelming negativity or false positivity, I think is fair to say. So I could hit that mark. I might miss it by a million miles. I'm sure that you'll let me know. But let's jump into the comments now and let's hear what the CEOs have to say. Richard McLucky kicks us off and he said 3 key signings for me are required: centre half, centre mid, and centre forward. Get that right, and it could transform the team. The Euro run has been incredibly disappointing and feels like that we are back to before Gerrard with regards our reputation. What has saddened me the most, well, it's been totally understandable in the stadium, is the atmosphere, particularly during those Euro nights last night, was very flat, and until we start delivering consistency of results and performances, that's where we sit. Richard, I think taking the points back to front, I agree with you. The atmosphere was really flat at Ibrox on Thursday night. I think, as I kind of touched on, the real challenge at the moment is getting fans to feel motivated about being able to come. There's plenty of regular attending season ticket holders who are around me in the main stand, and they were missing last night. And as I say, these guys are always there. And from a few people that were there, there was no one who was looking forward to it. The magic, I think it's fair to say, has gone. And my hope is that we've not fell out of love with European nights because of how much we were in love with them because of some of the phenomenal performances that we've had over the last few years. European nights are incredibly special. I really do genuinely mean that. as soon as I say that, one word pops into my head, and it's Leipzig. Now, of course, that's a semi-final. That's been able to get to a major European final. Of course, that's it. But everyone who was at that game will remember what the atmosphere was like. And for slightly older bears of my own age, there is going to be an endless debate now about what was the best atmosphere in Ibrox when you talk about Europe, and it will be Parma or Leipzig will be the two front runners for me. And I was at both. I was fortunate enough to be at both, and I think Leipzig edges it for me. But I understand that now. It feels as if it's a chore. It's 45 quid every game. I'm not. I'm not going to tie that to the new European format of the tables, and you don't play teams home and away and stuff. Everyone knows what it used to be like. But ultimately, I think the real disappointment, as I touched on, is that that only 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you had Rangers teams who could beat what's been put in front of us across the course of this season. Um, and listen, there's absolute blame to be attributed there in terms of how Russell Martin set up, how the players have approached it. Personally, I was critical of Danny Rule on Thursday night because I thought that the subs were questionable. And again, I'm not going to blame him for the starting lineup because he has to be able to see from his players who does he think he can get 90 minutes out of, 60 minutes out of, etc. So I'm by no means turning around and saying that Danny Rule was at fault last night for Rangers not being able to get the 3 points. The overwhelming evidence is the quality of the squad, and he has to be able to work with that. And he does have, one, if not both hands tied behind his back until we can get to the January window and whatever happens within that. But that team, there's a symbiotic relationship between that team and how the fans feel, and it's not there. It's just simply not there in Thursday nights now. And my hope is that we can recover that magic. Personally speaking, and I'm happy to have this conversation with anyone who disagrees, that we're going to really struggle to reproduce that this season. I think we have to get to the stage now where we're almost writing off our European campaign. It's now, however you want to term it, you're in the bunker, you're behind the eight ball. We are in an incredibly difficult position now to be able to get anything out of this Europa campaign. And it might be just a case of writing off, and then we have to be able to focus on the next one. And ultimately, as things stand to now, and as anyone who saw the financial reports that came out from James Taylor last week, uh, Europe's massive. It's absolutely huge in terms of the revenue to the club. It really, really is. So we can't be blasé about these things. We can't just say, oh, well, don't worry about it. We can just focus on the league. Europe doesn't matter. It massively does. Coming back to Richard's point as well regarding the signings, centre half, centre mid, centre forward, I totally agree with that as well. I assume, and Richard, I apologise for speaking on your behalf, but I'm assuming that design is set around a spine of a team to be able to try and go forward with it, where there is a degree of structure within a formation that has to be interchangeable, which Danny Rule will definitely do. He will chop and change. He's shown that before. But there has to be almost like that linear, design of you can rely on this guy in this part of the team. You can rely on that guy in that part of the team. And if it goes forward to the centre forward, you know that you're going to have someone up there who is going to be versatile enough that I'm not talking about being able just to pluck a 20 or 25 goal a season striker out of thin air. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do. But someone who has all of the attributes that we ideally need and can mix and match those as various different levels of games present themselves. If, and again, like I say, I'd love to be wrong, but we are now going to be solely focused on the domestic campaign, really from January going forward. The variety doesn't need to be that much. It can be someone who's physical, who can score goals, is able to sniff out chances, who contributes. But being able to do that against teams in Scotland, and again, without having to rewrite history, I think a lot of us probably felt that when we were getting Bojan Majowski coming in, and he just hasn't been able to hit that whatsoever. Let's move on to Brian Campbell, and Brian says every position needs strengthened. There's a definite argument for that. I think, as we mentioned, there has been a removal of quality from the end of last season to now. Some of you may remember, and I cannot remember. I think it was the Hibs game, but my memory is terrible, so I apologise if I've got that wrong. There was a graphic which came up on screen which showed you the goals from Cyril Dessers, Hamza Egerman, and Flavclav Cherny that came in. And it just, when I looked at that graphic, I was just like, that is dreamland stuff to us at the moment. It really is. We have not been able to replace players better. You know, again, just thinking of the front three on their own. Cyril Dessers created so much conversation, so much chat across all the WhatsApps groups and the fans forums and podcasts and pretty much everywhere, right? Of course, we've all seen that as well. But the goals were going to be a miss. Over 50 goals in 2 seasons. You are going to miss that. So if you're going to have to replace him, then you have to be able to do that. Danilo remains, and I think has always been our third choice striker. I struggled to understand the decision to play him on the left wing against Braga on Thursday night. He doesn't have the pace to be able to do that, and I think that when you then go up and you then get the advantage of an extra man, you want to be able to try and see what you can do to get some pace on, to interject it. And even if Danilo hadn't started, I still wouldn't have brought him on at that stage with a man up, because I just don't think he has it any longer. A couple of opportunities that failed to him, I personally think, were the epitome of a striker who's trying to get goals, but he's over trying, is the easiest way I can be able to say it. He had a ball that was played to him slightly behind him by Diomande when we were on a break, and he absolutely snatches at that chance. Another one which came to us from a corner, and he actually should have left it for Connor Barron, but he has to pivot and then be able to get the shot away. I mean, it's going to be an incredible strike if he can get it in from that situation. But again, nothing came of it. And as we talked about with Majovsky, if you look at Egerman had to go, right? So I'm not going to sit here and say for a single minute that we should have, uh, knocked back any offers for Egerman. We could not have replicated the Alfredo Morelos situation. We had to strike while iron's hot, and he had to go. And he's been banging them in for Lille, and I don't bear him any ill will towards that. I was pissed off with his attitude when he was leaving, but he's not the first player in world football in the modern era to engineer a move because he wants that move to happen. And his existing club probably end up paying a bit of the price for his attitude. But ultimately, we were remunerated. However, we have not brought in adequate replacements to even meet that standard, much less exceed it. And again, we know who to blame for that. Brian continues as well about the European run and said it's been an abject failure thus far. Totally agree. And I'll bet you we've fallen 20% short in projected Euro income. I will be honest with you, Brian. I agree with that totally in terms of the numbers mentioned and the percentages and what have you. But I also think as well that there is going to be part of this that was key to the board's thinking about not just relieving Kevin Thelwell, but also Russell Martin. And as I've mentioned already, we cannot be blasé about our European runs. The money is too essential towards our operation to simply turn our nose up at it or not treat it with the respect that it deserves. And yeah, I think that, as we've kind of mentioned, in terms of we need to be able to kind of draw out results, especially domestically. And listen, if we get to Ibrox on Sunday afternoon and we turn on a world-class display, I'll be celebrating alongside everyone else, but I wouldn't be putting a mortgage on it as things kind of stand at the moment. So yeah, the whole element of this in terms of how we inject some of that quality is going to be absolutely huge with it as well. Rona Bluebell asked a brilliant question about this, and this was in relation to the sporting director. He said, could you expand on the Lee McCulloch observation you made during the week and whether he could be a possible director of football? If not him, anyone else you'd care to speculate on? Rona and I had some good back and forth on this. I can't remember if it was someone else that she was that she was listening to on our Patreon network. Lee McCulloch is currently the talent acquisition manager at Brighton and Hove Albion. anyone who has been at Ibrox in the last few months, you know that Lee McCulloch is a mainstay there. Do you know what I mean? He's always got Rangers close to his heart. Here's the issue with being able to get this. For a sporting director position, a director of football position, but also from a CEO position. There's been too many times, in my opinion, where Rangers have went after the bridesmaid and not the bride. And we have seen far too frequently guys that were brought into these roles that have experiences which touch on them. So I'm talking about C-suite, you know, mainstays, people who have operated at big levels, but you could have been a CFO or you could have been commercial director or something of that nature. Um, I can't have that again. We have not succeeded at it. Now, you can bring someone in that has worked in those positions in any industry, right? I hope sport and football would be absolutely ideal. But if you bring someone in as your CEO who hasn't fulfilled that position, they can come in with all the hunger and enthusiasm and, as much as you want all of those things. The bottom line, however, is that it's not a substitute for in role experience as far as I'm concerned. And we have seen far too many people in the higher positions at Rangers who we have felt would go into those types of roles and do well. And we've missed more than we've hit is probably the best way I can put it, because fundamentally it's a gamble. And anyone who's worked in recruitment and hiring and all of that kind of world, all hires are a gamble. Even if you bring someone in with experience, they might not come into your culture or they might not come into your existing team and hit the ground running. You just hope that they can, but experience has to be a prerequisite. And I wanted, and I said this at the time, was when we were looking for a new head coach to replace Russell Martin, I genuinely was hoping that we wouldn't contain ourselves to a field of candidates who were currently unemployed. And I know the three main names mentioned as the process went on were Gerard, Muscat, and obviously Danny Rule. And I was pleased that we were looking at being able to get someone in within that group who was currently in employment, because I think you have to make it, firstly, a harder sell as yourself as a business to entice that person to come. But also from that perspective, you're not limiting your options. We have to do the same thing here, in my opinion. And whether it's from a director of football perspective, sporting director, however we're going to term it, we need to be able to bring someone in who has got consistency and experience within that, has got an openness to global markets rather than local ones. And by local, I mean within that country, because I think that has bitten us in the arse a little bit too much across the course of this season thus far. Good connections within the game. Now, if you need to go and hire that person because all of those prerequisites, this person might have absolutely filled to brim with them, you're going to have to pay for that. And the 49ers, and we're going to touch on this later in another question that came in, but the 49ers have to realise that that's how this is going to have to work. We cannot take another gamble. I'm recording this on Friday afternoon, and I've just recently read an article regarding James Taylor, our current CFO, is being looked at as a potential CEO replacement. I have nothing against James Taylor. I've got no issues with what he does, anything like that. So this isn't personal about him. But the 49ers are going to be massively, massively scrutinised by how these decisions go. They're going to be scrutinised by the amount of money that we talk about for expenditure in January and how we deal with some of those players and outgoings, etc. But CEO, sport director positions, this is on the 49ers. And I understand that people give them credit and blame in equal proportion for hiring Russell Martin, getting Thelwell into position. Obviously, Patrick Stewart was in the midst of the initial investigation, but he was involved within it. I think we can all say that now with a degree of confidence. Terrible, terrible appointments. And people will blame them for that, but they will now give them credit for pushing the button and getting rid of these guys, even if it's been a little bit later than most of us would have liked, but they will give them credit as a result of that. The next thing from that perspective then is you almost get one shot at redemption. So if they are going to appoint James Taylor, and myself, everyone listening to this, and pretty much every Rangers fan I know, will want to get behind that appointment because we will want him to succeed. If he succeeds, it means that Rangers are succeeding. What we need to be able to then say is, this is on you. You get a chance to be able to fix it. You've had that chance. Now this is going to be very much at your door if you do not think that, or sorry, this potential move does not populate. So again, as I've said before, with replacing the manager, replacing the head coach, key positions, fundamentally for me, my preference is always do your due diligence. Make sure that your selection is watertight for what you have to be able to do. You cannot bring in someone that you think, if you've got doubts over them, if you've got doubts over their understanding of what they're walking into, because Scotland is its own wee weird environment, and it's all, down is up and all the rest of it. You can't bring in someone from down south again who thinks, well, listen, it'll be a bit of a scoosh. You've already had your fingers burned with that, and you have only been here for 6 months. So again, you have to be able to make sure that you have filled all of those key areas of that individual's recruitment, and you're satisfied with all of that. If there's a gap, then take a moment to seriously consider if you feel this is the right selection. Brian asks, the defence is a massive problem. We need to try and get out the loan deals and replace with fresh players. Giga has been a disaster and Aaron's just isn't needed. I'd be a fan of one experienced bastard to start to bed in Fernandez and bring back Nsiala. Both are young and inexperienced, but big, strong guys, but mostly done okay in the short spells that we've seen them. We desperately need we desperately need creativity in midfield. That's easy for me to say. I do think that there are better players than Ant-Man and Gassama than we've seen, but we end up failing to provide to them by playing back all the time. We need to start playing in behind teams somehow, and by hitting the byline. This is the only way we can bring our attacking players and forwards into the games, especially Majovski, who thrives on that. One defender and two midfielders for me. I don't see us bringing in any more than three players, to be honest, and no more midgets. Yeah, I agree. I agree with pretty much all of that. As I said before, I think that we can see more from these players, and I think Danny Rule is going to be able to create that for us. But at the same time, it's going to have to be as he beds in his system, as he comes in, and he's going to have games to prove it. Of course, he will have. But then he also has to turn around to these players like Ant-Man and Gassama and say, I can get more from you. Are you willing to give it? I think that's key. Creativity, as we've mentioned, especially from within the middle of the park, is really, really poor. Raskan, I thought, was not great. I thought, at times he looked a bit sloppy with the ball, taking a few too many touches. Passing was not great. Connor Barron, I think, did a great job in terms of his energy, but Connor Barron is going to continue to develop. He's not the finished article. Raskan needs to be able to step up for me if he wants to be able to show what a leader he is. He has had some brilliant reviews playing for Belgium, as most of us know. But at the same point, I wonder, does that now mean that because his head is pretty much set in a place of, I have made the World Cup, I've made the national team selection for the World Cup, that maybe I can phone it in a little bit? Well, it doesn't even really work like that. He's going to have to continue to impress, and there will be players around him within that Belgian team, and they're all vying for positions now. So for the guys who aren't guaranteed at the moment, then you need to think about that competition and being able to do it. And that's a basic foundation of what you have to be able to do at Rangers, is you have to continue to prove yourself. And you might have had a game last week or midweek or whenever, but you're going to be assessed in your next game. And if you want to take that easy and you want to give, minimal levels of effort, and you do give the ball away, and you almost look like a passenger in it, Rangers fans will not accept it. So again, from that perspective, I definitely feel that there are midfielders around him who can take a little bit of encouragement from him as a global player, that he continues to set standards. He continues to raise the bar. He can't take the foot off the gas to be able to do that. And again, there's other people within that you look at guys like Tello Asgard. Tello Asgard, I am so frustrated by, because if you were to look at him, you'd think he's got the perfect physique to be able to play in Scotland. He's big, he's robust, not so much. And it speaks to Brian's point about midgets. Listen, I did not think that Ridvan Yilmaz was the greatest left back he's ever played for Rangers. But one thing I'll never criticise him for was, he had plenty of fight in him. Even if he didn't have the physical prowess, he wouldn't back down from a challenge. Asgard could have that. Does he want it? Is probably the other question within that as well. And yeah, I agree. I think David spoke about this potentially on Thursday night in the post match. And I think we covered it within our car pod as well when we were talking about the fallout of the Braga game. It would be great to get someone, as Brian mentions there, with experience to play alongside Fernandez and start to marshal that defence a little bit. Before anyone asks, I'm not in any way advocating being able to bring Tav in a position. That's not going to work. We need someone else who can be able to try and come in there. I think that John Suter has got massive limitations, if I'm being perfectly honest. There are Rangers teams that John Suter wouldn't get anywhere near being involved in recent history, but we have to obviously work with what we've got. Cornelius I like, but does seem prone to injury. Fitness could be a question around that as well, and availability and everything else as well. So yeah, I agree. I think it would be great to be able to bring someone in with enough energy and with enough youth, but also with enough experience in the tank to look at guys like Fernandez and Inciala. And I liked Inciala. He was obviously as prone to mistakes as we saw last season, but it's our role to develop him. That's why we brought him here. And he seems very much out of the picture at the moment. Maybe with the centre half injuries, he could feature again, being able to go forward. Just moving on to that, Dougie Christie says, how many times have we approached a window in this position? Barring a goalkeeper, the spine of the team needs addressing. Quality through the centre half position, centre mids that can control a game, centre forward that can score 18 to 25 goals a season consistently. Yep, Dougie, as we've kind of mentioned, totally agree with that. I think that's a very fair summation. It's sickening to see us waste the money that we did in the summer based on zero evidence. I would certainly prefer to see more outgoings than incomings, but we have to give the manager at least 2 windows to get his type of player in. If we don't go, if we don't, we go round the merry-go-round again. Here's food for thought. Everyone moaned about Balogun, Dessers, etc. How many of them would have them back now? Yeah, Dougie, I think it's listen, very, very fair. We have wasted money. We have got wastage within the playing squad. The thing I would also say as well is that I know that people will almost turn to this idea of cancel the loans and we spent 8 million quid on them getting out the door and stuff. These things cannot happen, right? You can't take a player in on loan and then just go, do you know what? I really dislike him. I'm just going to get rid of him after 6 months. Now, in some circumstances, you can do that if there's sound reasoning behind it, but it's not a great optic to be able to then say as a club, if you want to continue to operate in a loan market, as we will, and as we will continue to do, that we'll bring someone in, but if he doesn't hit the marks, then he's away, because that player's not getting into the team at his parent club. He's not getting into the team at his loan club. And now all of a sudden that parent club has to be able to see what they have to be able to do with them. And restrictions then could mean that you can't go back out on loan. Now all of a sudden you've re-inherited a player that you had thought you would be getting rid of for 12 months. So there's elements of it within that as well. And there's other players just now that, as far as I'm concerned, we need to be able to seriously get off the books. We've got, the squad is a bit bloated, but ultimately right now as things stand, we need to look at, okay, so how do we start trimming the edges? Where do we have a real critical think about some of the players that we do feel can contribute? Whether it's in the next few months, whether or not you're talking about the next year or two or whatever, fine. There's going to be transitions when we see players coming out of contracts, regular first team starters. So those guys in the fringes, do you feel that they've got the capability to come in and start replacing those guys? And you're future proofing. But if you don't feel that they can do that, then I would say, start aggressively looking to be able to try and move them out of the team. Tom McDavid, Tom, hope that yourself and the family are well. Thank you for sending this in. Said, centre half, centre forward are priorities, and after that, a midfielder who can pass and create. Yep, very much feel that way. I'd hoped that was almost the Joe Rothwell that we were going to inherit. Very much not. Jason Allen says, off the pitch question here, with them across the city in open revolt, does it make it even more important our next CEO can directly take on Lawwell and his puppets? We've seen back in 2010 when Bain allowed Lawwell to attack our club constantly what has happened and how little influence now. And in order to combat it, we need someone able to see the political landscape and tackle it head on. Otherwise, we just keep being second best. What are your thoughts? Jason, I'm in 100% agreement with you. One of the things that really, really gets under my skin, and listen, there's plenty of it, especially during the Murray Bain period as well. But one of the things that has really, really got under my skin in terms of what's happened to us within the last 10 to 15 years is that we've allowed the Celtic to create a political powerhouse. And I'm not subscribing to fantasy theories. If you disagree with this, then I would absolutely respect your opinion. But fundamentally, Celtic have been able to come in and take control of the table, and they are marrow deep in terms of some of the facilities of our national game that have allowed them to start dictating policy, to start to rule agendas, and let's just say been able to control things from behind the curtain. And Peter Lawwell has done an exceptional job of that. Whether you like him or not, or your football and pursuit, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. The simple fact is it's happened, and you can see it, and it impacts Rangers, and it impacts Rangers every single season. So I agree. We need a CEO. The difficulty here is I don't think that there is anyone within the Scottish football and landscape that can take on Peter Lawwell. So in that case, what you may need to do is be able to try and bring in someone who maybe does have experience of similar sets of circumstances, being able to try and deal within that political arena in another country, and coming in and being a proper key operator. It needs to be someone who will come in, and if they need to leave bodies on the floor, then go ahead and do it, because that's what's going to overturn this. Celtic are not going to go through what we went through. It's not going to happen. And yes, they're a bin fire, and yes, it's hilarious because all of a sudden there's a crisis when you don't win your umpteenth trophy in a row. But at the same point, we can't overturn what they've done by going through the sleek it and backhanded manoeuvres and engineering that they did. This will have to take someone who can come in and break the walls down. That's, again, what I was talking about before with a very, very tricky recruitment campaign. And my hope is that 49ers Enterprises understands that. I don't know if they do, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, because they're not situated here full time. I don't know how aware they are. And let's face facts, like I say, they've been here for 6 months. I appreciate everything that happened beforehand in terms of, the bidding for the club and how that all came about. I appreciate all of that. But at the same point, there's day-to-day things that we can see happening here, where you can see the Celtic hand controlling it. I want to make sure that anyone that they bring in can tackle it. And I think that's really, really important. A great point, Jason. Thank you. Close to wrapping up, I've got a couple of questions left, and this is a really good post by Stephen. He said, well, I fully accept not a damn thing can be done about Kavanagh, Marathi and the 49ers. I do have serious reservations over the running of the club to this point. To get everything as wrong as they have suggests a spectacular lack of ability. I have zero confidence that they are the right people to even sort this mess. Thelwell, Stewart and Martin will rightfully haunt them for the rest of their careers. We now require every position to not only be upgraded, but the squad options are required to back whomever they are. And I know that this is impractical, but it's needed. During this abject disaster of a season, you will have seen many fans disengage from tickets, hospitality, merchandise. It's not automatic this miraculously comes back. I don't mind admitting I found this Euro run a real challenge to keep attending. I have up to this point, but it's dull and uninspiring to watch. As for the Christmas period, we're going to get what we get, but all roads lead back to that hapless, hopeless and clueless people at the top. I have zero faith that those responsible for destroying the team will get it right. Stephen, firstly, I know that you've kind of apologised in your message. I'm not going to read that out purely just because I don't need you to apologise. I understand the frustration. I feel it the same way because I don't necessarily think that it's came from mismanagement. I I think where it's came from is you had this real high of emotion with the takeover and the build up towards the tail end of last season, and you thought this is a new dawn. And at the moment, short term, it's turned out to be a false dawn. I understand that, and I think that there is a lot of that where because you're so like all of us, you're so emotionally engaged in terms of what happens, right? Because Rangers is my life, right? I'm sure that a lot of you are the same, where it can dictate your mood, it can dictate whether you've had a good day or not, and it can ruin it just as much. You want it to be successful. You want Rangers to be able to return to where we are in terms of winning trophies on a consistent basis, and that was almost like the carrot on the end of the stick. Had they got it all right and everything had been running and hunky dory, everybody would have been singing their praises, and I get all of that. Ultimately, for me, what I need to be able to try and do is become slightly dispassionate, and I think look at it with a little bit of kind of cold-hearted logistics, I suppose is probably the best way I could say it. I don't think the 49ers enterprises fully understood what they were coming into. I genuinely don't. I think that they thought that they could lift and shift certain models. I thought that they could bring in degrees of infrastructure because they'd done it elsewhere, and as a result of that, it would work here, and it hasn't. And there has absolutely, as we've already kind of covered, been wholly, grossly inappropriate appointments. And again, there's a blame credit thing there. They take the blame for that, but they get the credit for being able to try and fix it. Again, small asterisk there, could have been done sooner. Get that. So there's also a part of me that thinks you have to be able to give an accurate reflection. And I don't think 6 months for a takeover of our size and what they were looking to do is going to work like that. And I also think that there's a part of that where when they talk about the investment and the money that's come in, you can't wave shiny dollars at us and say, right, well, this will solve everything because you've wasted all of that money because of the guy you appointed. So my hope is that, and I do genuinely mean this, that they've learned from that. Actually, we can't treat the fan base like this. They're not daft. And given recent history and what the last 20 years has looked like for us, there will be suspicion and there will be fear and hope and all of those other emotional elements that come into it. But you have to respond to that in a way that's befitting of a function of your size, from the 49ers enterprises, but also what our specific needs are and our desires and what we need to be able to do and the roadmap to go forward. And I'm not trying to give them excuses, please don't think that, but I think from me personally, where I'm at, and again, just only in my own opinion, there's probably still a part of my brain overruling my heart that says you need to think about what is actually short term versus long term. I don't think 6 months is a fair assessment, but I'll tell you something right now. If we were still sitting in this place with Martin, Thelwell, Stewart on board, I'd be feeling a damn sight worse. So always want to try and be optimistic. I hope that McGatt, Kavanagh, except everyone involved within all of that, that they've learned their lesson and they can't repeat it. They simply can't repeat it for the scrutiny that will be placed on them beforehand, if I mention. Last question of the show for this week comes from Gordon Miller. Gordon, I hope you're well, my friend. Said, given the disasters of the current squad, how much money will it take to be back into competitive to get back to being competitive for league titles, and will the Americans be willing to pay this? We've been told that there's money there. How much, what that looks like, I honestly couldn't tell you. I was at I suppose you could call it an EGM when the takeover happened, and one of the things, and it was Brad McGatt who was very vocal about this, was that whilst there'll be degrees of transparency in terms of running a club, they will be deliberately opaque when it comes to transfers and how to be able to do that. And there's obvious reasons for being able to do that and conduct business in that way, because you want to get value for money. And as soon as a club, whether it's Rangers or anyone else, and we've all seen it, walk in with money in their pocket, all of a sudden the price goes up. So by and large, we want to be able to make sure that we can do deals efficiently and quickly. But the big focus right now will be is I cannot get on board with this idea that there's a solution to this problem, but purely by throwing money at it. So the key element here is, are we looking at? I mean, I think we have at the moment just now one more loan slot that we could do, but I don't want to exacerbate the problem that I mentioned earlier on about being able to bring in lackluster talent on relatively good contracts, and then simply what you're doing is you're going to do a bit of a kind of fire purchase in January to then be landed with a longer term problem. There's part of me that actually thinks if we get to January and we are still within a relatively decent position in the league, then I can't see the value in that because, yeah, we could get the league over the line, but I think it would take miracles. But if we are out of it altogether, then I think we have to start looking at future planning for 26, 27, is my honest opinion. So I think that the Americans will want to spend money. I do, because I think that they'll feel that this is almost how to be able to recover the situation that we're in. Um, it is, as always, and I'm sorry to give you a really, really obvious answer to this, Gordon, but it's always about how that money is spent. It's always about how you can then attach that. And that is everything that everyone I spoke to had concerns about January if Kevin Thelwell was still in place. Who will, how we will come through that window, who knows? Thank you to our CEOs for those questions. It's much appreciated. If you'd like to join us in our Patreon site and get benefits such as being a CEO and being able to get some exclusive shows like this, you can head on over to patreon.com/heart and hand, and you'll be able to get loads and loads of Rangers content across there for only a couple of quid a month. And you'll get loads of shows every single day, and all of our build-up as well when we come into games, pre-match pressers, post-match pressers, etc., as well. The other thing that I want to also just call out as well, folks, if you haven't had a chance to, we've been very lucky to be involved in a fan takeover night, which is involving our very own host, David Edgar, Stevie Clifford, the Four Lads Had a Dream, and CG Novo as well. Brilliant YouTuber as well, if anyone wants to go on and have a watch of that if you haven't already, but plenty of people know who WCG is. We're doing a fan takeover night at New Emerson House on the 9th of January. And if you fancy attending that, head on to the Edmondson House site and get some tickets now. They are selling pretty fast. So ideal Christmas present for someone. And it's one of those really good Christmas presents where you can maybe buy one for yourself and you've kind of given them a treat, but you've given yourself a treat as well. Always love those Christmas presents. David will be back with you on Monday to unpack the game against Falkirk on Sunday, and I'll be back with you next week. In the meantime, thank you to Mike Lee and Paul Myers. Thank you to you all for listening, and hope you've enjoyed it. Bye-bye for now.